everybody, it's Elysabeth Alfano, the host of the Plant-Based Business Hour. We're live today, like always. Thanks for being with me. So do blended products make sense? By that, I mean plant-based and meat together blended for a partial product. That remains to be seen, but I want to talk to my host today, who's the CEO of the Better Meat Company. Before I bring him on, Paul Shapiro, who does rock the world. He's just a huge force in the plant-based movement. Before I bring him on, I have a bit of admin to say. Someone reached out to me and asked me by email for my top 5 picks of publicly traded companies that are plant-based. I was in the middle of writing them back and my computer crashed. So that person, I'm trying to write you back. I cannot find your email. Please reach out to me again. Okay, that said, admin out of the way, I want to bring on Paul Shapiro, CEO of the Better Meat Company. Paul, thanks for being with me today.
Hi, Elizabeth. Great to be with you. And I'm a listener of the show and I'm honored to be on with you. But I'm not the one who emailed you about the 5 companies, but I would be shocked if there were 5 companies that were publicly traded that did plant-based. So that were, I'm sure there are some, I know Beyond Meat and the Very Good Butchers, but who else? I want to hear these other ones to know who I should be investing in.
Oh gosh, well, this is a different show, but you've got the Tactical Chef, and you've also got Eat Beyond Foods, and you've got Laird Superfoods, and those are sort of North America. Now, if we wanted to go to Israel, we get out a bunch of others, and there's more coming on the pipeline all the time, and that is a different show, so I can have you back.
Okay, well, when you do email that fan of yours the answer, CC me. I want to get that list myself.
Well, okay. In fact, this has prompted an article in Vegconomist. I write for the magazine all the time, so I'll be sure to get you a copy of that article magazine that I'm writing right now, and I'll put you on the list, and maybe others too. If anybody else is interested, of course, email me. But I don't want to take away from our topic today. Before we get into it, and we will, people, I want to say that, of course, in addition to being the CEO of the Better Meat Company, you are the author of the best-selling book, Clean Meat: How Growing Meat Without Animals Will Revolutionize Dinner and the World. I couldn't agree more. And then, of course, you are the host of the Business for Good podcast, and you've just spoken at TEDx at least 4 times, if not more. You are a consistently published author in New York Times and Washington Post and other places. So thank you for all you do. But let's get into it. The Better Meat Company. Tell us exactly what that is, and be ready for my follow-up question. Why?
I can't wait for that follow-up question. But before, I'll have to wait. And I'll tell you, we are a B2B ingredient startup. We're based in Sacramento. We're still a small company. We have only 15 people who work here. But we're growing and we're doing important things. And what we do is we offer plant-based protein formulas that are comprised of proteins, fibers, fats, and flavors that we sell as unique formulas that blend seamlessly into actual animal meat so that major food companies can use fewer animals and more plants. And so as an example, we sell to Purdue Farms, the major chicken company, for them to make a blended chicken nugget, chicken tender, and chicken patty. They're called Purdue Chicken Plus. Those products are 50% chicken, 50% plant-based. They're sold in 7,100 grocery stores, and they've grown to be, according to published reports, about 20% of all the frozen chicken nuggets that Purdue sells. So they were non-existent a couple years ago. Now they're 20% of their frozen nuggets. And the Food Network recently named them the best tasting frozen chicken nugget in America. So think about that. The best tasting frozen chicken nugget in America is only 50% chicken. Imagine how many fewer animals would be raised for food if all of the chicken nuggets were made with only 50% chicken. So I'm a huge fan of fully plant-based. In fact, we sell our ingredients to companies making fully plant-based products as well. So we don't only provide plant protein solutions for other companies to blend with, we also provide ingredients for fully plant-based products too. But because I believe it's so important for the sake of animals and for the planet, we also are specialists in creating plant protein formulas that other companies can make seamless blend into their meat. And I'd love to talk about why when you get to that question as well.
Okay, so a quick follow-up and then we'll get into the why. So you had said that chicken nuggets are 50-50. I thought I read on the website that most products, well, you say a minimum of 30%, a minimum of a third, but you're finding that your clients use it up to 50%. Is that accurate?
Well, yeah. So first, you can use them up to 100%. You can go fully plant-based with our ingredients. At the same time, we don't control what our customers do with our ingredients. We sell fully plant-based protein formulas that are extremely effective at blending into meat. Depending on the application, you can use it at a 30% inclusion rate, a 50% inclusion rate, or go even higher depending on certain applications. So I'm a huge fan of hybridization because I believe it is such an efficient way to help animals. Now, like many of your listeners, I'm a vegan. Been vegan since 1993. My wife is a vegan cookbook author. I think it's a great thing to do. But we also have to accept the reality that meat consumption is going up, not down. Right. We like to live in a bubble in the vegan community, and we like to look at all the great news that is occurring. And indeed, there is wonderful news, huge signs of progress. But let's keep in mind, per person meat consumption in the United States and China and India and Mexico and Brazil and all the places it's going to matter the most is still going up, not down. And if you believe really the most aggressive forecast, like if you look at Barclay's forecast, they say that by the year 2030, 10% of all the meat is going to be alternative meat, whether coming from plant-based or clean meat. And that's great. That's wonderful. But that means that a decade from now, 90% of the meat is still going to be coming from tens of billions of animals who are factory farmed in conditions that most of us don't want to even hear about. So that to me means that we need lots of solutions in the same way that the problem of fossil fuels is so great. You want lots of alternatives. You want wind and solar and geothermal and so on. The problem of factory farms is also so serious that we want lots of options. We want clean meat. We want plant-based meat. And yes, just like we need hybrid cars that serve as a bridge between going to all electric and using purely fossil fuel-based cars, we also can use hybrid meats in order to reduce the number of animals who are going to be used in the meantime.
Okay, so much to unpack there. I will say that I really value this alternative method of turning the food supply system, the animal agriculture food supply system around. So in an ideal world, people would say, well, sure, you know, we're plant-based tomorrow, and we just switch over as if magically we could switch over all the factories, all the machinery, all the know-how. A lot of people don't have the know-how in the co-manufacturing plants to actually help produce at scale plant-based products. It's something I also wrote about in Vegconomist. So it's not that easy to just say we'll scale up and suddenly go from 100% of a meat producing company to now 100% of a plant producing country. So I really respect this alternative way. I'm hoping that Paul's image is coming back. Okay, we have Paul again. I really see the value of trying to inch your way in there, for lack of a better expression, to this blended product. Let me ask you, here's the why. Do you have a vision for where your clients will go? Clients like Purdue, are you expecting them, hoping for them to go fully plant-based? Or are you just hoping to sort of chip away at the meat market by, you know, taking out 50% of what it produces because you have blended products?
Sure. Well, first, Elizabeth, I do see that I am frozen on camera, so I don't know what's the deal with that, but I hope you can at least hear me. I hope you can at least hear my words, right? Yeah. Okay, good. So hopefully I'll come back in a second. But point is, you know, I would love for these companies, I would love nothing more than for them to continually use fewer and fewer animals. I think that's great. But I think we have to recognize the reality that, you know, even when we celebrate that these major meat companies are adding plant-based lines and they're making investments in clean meat companies, they're also adding new slaughter plants. Right. You know, that's the reality. I mean, they're expanding. I mean, they believe that more animals, not fewer, are going to be used in the food system in the future. People like you and I, Elizabeth, are working toward creating a food system that's less reliant on animals. But these meat companies, at least the ones who I talk with, believe that, you know, that the world is going to be eating more animals, not fewer, in the future. And so I want to make sure that we can help them use fewer animals, because they don't care. Many of them would be quite pleased to consume or to use fewer animals. Like they just want to sell good tasting, safe, nutritious protein products for their customers. So they don't really care where that protein comes from. But what the problem is that when you have a world that's demanding more and more meat, it's hard to envision them just saying, we're not going to supply it. And so, yes, I would love to see the world that you're referencing. I mean, I would love to have world peace also, but I suspect that we're going to have to offer solutions. And now, I don't think that hybridization is necessarily the only thing to do. I just think that it's an effective way to actually help reduce demand. In the same way, if you think about, for example, when you fill up your car, Elizabeth, when you're putting gas in your car, you don't even contemplate that probably 15% of it is ethanol. It's coming from renewables. You know, you don't even think about it. It's just the fact you're using 15% fewer fossil fuels because you've switched to ethanol. Now, it's not a perfect analogy. I think there are some detriments to ethanol that, you know, complicate the analogy a little bit, but the premise is the same, that by hybridizing the fuel that goes into our cars, we have automatically reduced fossil fuel usage without making people even think about it. And I'll give you an example of if you think about, like, the fact that currently plant-based meat is less than 1% of all the meat that is produced, less than 1%. Now imagine that you're the director of dining at a corporate cafeteria and you're serving pork sausages. And imagine that you decide you're going to offer a vegan sausage. That's great. And by some miracle, it's going to be the same exact price as the meat sausage, which is, of course, doesn't happen. But let's just say for the sake of the thought experiment, that's what happens. Lunchtime comes, the employees come in and they have to decide which product they're going to buy. What percentage of people do you think are going to switch permanently from the pork sausage to the vegan sausage? Probably very small, probably less than 5%. Whereas if in addition to offering the vegan sausage, you could also make the pork sausage just say 30 or maybe 50% plant-based, all of a sudden, instead of a reduction of 5% of meat consumption, you're actually reducing 30 to 50% meat consumption by simply making the default product better. And so the key isn't to try to attract people to not buy the plant-based product at all, obviously, but the key is to make the default product that nearly everybody is buying better so that you can actually effectuate even bigger reductions. And that's really the goal of the blending movement.
Yes, and I'm curious about these products because I don't eat them myself. I'm wondering, does it say on the package, I believe it does, that this is a partial hybrid, yes?
Yeah, for Purdue it does, but for other customers of ours, it doesn't. So, for example, you could have a product that is what's considered stealth health. So if you think about like the canned soup manufacturers, under the Michelle Obama initiative, many of them reduced sodium in their products, but they didn't tout it. They didn't say on the product, this has less sodium, because many consumers, when they hear less sodium, they think it means less flavor. And so they just gradually, quietly reduced it. Now, of course, it shows up on the nutrition facts label that there's less sodium, but on the front of the package, it doesn't. Similarly, you can do blending without having to say anything. You can just put it in the product. Of course, it changes the ingredient deck, needless to say. You have to be honest about what's in there, but you don't necessarily have to market it as a blended product if you don't want.
Yeah, I think this is fascinating. Again, so much to unpack here. I just want to step back for just a tad bit. So I didn't know that meat consumption was going up in the United States. I knew it was going up around the world at about 2%, because really pushed up because of China and India. I actually thought in Western Europe and the United States, we were pulling back on meat consumption. So it's fascinating to know. And of course, the easier you can make it for people to eat less animals, and they won't even know the difference, the better it is. And so you do that in a blended product. I do want to bring I'll share my screen here, and maybe this will bring Paul back. We'll see. Paul, are you familiar with the A.T. Kearney? Let me bring it up. The A.T. Kearney chart recently that came out that said by 2040, here it is, you'll see that plant-based and cellular meat, cultivated meat, and they don't even have fermentation in here, will be 60% of the market. Have you seen this before from A.T. Kearney?
Yeah, first of all, I hope that they're right. First of all, yes, I have seen it. Second, I pray that they're right. And I would also point out that even if that is true, that it's going to be 60% of the market in the next 20 years, that still means tens of billions of animals are going to be raised for food. And as somebody who has really devoted much of my life to advocating for the welfare of animals, that's not just a statistic. You know, these are individuals. We're talking about astronomical numbers of individuals who are going to be treated in ways that are almost unspeakable in many respects. And so if A.T. Kearney is right, I would be overjoyed. I think it's going to be tough to reach that, but we're working toward it. But if we are going to reach that, it's going to take all hands on deck. It's going to mean that we're going to need lots of options. Just like, again, with renewable energy, we need lots of options, including hybridization, in order to wean ourselves off of our addiction to fossil fuels. And we're going to need lots of alternatives to wean ourselves off of our addiction to meat as well. And sadly, yes, I hate to say it, but we have to accept reality that meat consumption per person in the United States is higher than it has ever been, ever. ever.
Mhm.
And that's true in a lot of other countries. And it is true that there are some countries in Europe, like France and Germany, apparently, where meat consumption actually is declining. But for the most part in Europe, that's not true. And for the places where it's going to matter the most, where the most populated and the biggest incoming middle classes, as people escape poverty, one of the first things they start doing is eating more meat. And so in places like China and India, where not only do you have, populations in each of them of over 1 billion people, but lots of people want to start eating meat now who wouldn't have eaten meat in the past because they couldn't afford it. And so, we're facing a very stark reality. And plant-based meat is fantastic. It's a great option. And once it comes down in price, I think it's going to be a really great alternative for much of the world. But I think if we want to reduce the number of animals who inevitably are going to be used, we should also look at hybridization. And it kills me, Elizabeth, that I'm still frozen here. So just as an experiment, I'm going to turn my camera off for a second, and I'm going to turn it right back on, okay?
Lovely. You go ahead and do that. And okay. I'm going to do some talking just to give you that option. Okay. So it's fascinating what you say. And I'll also say about the, he's coming back, folks. What's very interesting to me too is, while it's not the fast solution that perhaps many would like if they care about animals or the environment or their wallets or their own health, it is a low... I think I have you, Paul. That's wonderful. Thank you for doing that. I don't know if you heard me at all, Paul, but I was saying it's also an interesting approach, not just because you obviously are replacing animals from the food supply system, which is what we all want, but also you're making meat more expensive. So if you have this hybridization, then it's more expensive because you're using less of it down the road to have meat. And ultimately it becomes this resources issue for the companies. Do I have that right?
It depends on the circumstance. So in some cases that may be so. So for example, with Purdue, our product costs more than chicken. Commodity chicken is extremely inexpensive. And so what they do is they basically market the bag of the Purdue Chicken Plus at the same price, but it's a fewer number of ounces. So it's line item priced, but you're paying more per ounce. Now for other products, for beef, which is much more expensive than chicken, that may not be true. Our products are pretty cost competitive with beef right now. So if you think about the science of plant-based meat, it's very different from the science of animal-based meat, but then there's an entirely other science of marrying animal and plant proteins together. And that's really where we focus, is on getting that seamless blend so the customer can't tell the difference at all. We're not talking about like vegetable inclusions that you can see inside of the meat or that you can taste. We're looking for a seamless blend so that to the customer, it doesn't look like anything different or doesn't taste like anything different at all. And that's really where we come in, and part of that is why we can actually be cost competitive with something like beef, whereas plant-based meat makers aren't doing that yet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I wondered if you had any comment about this. I'm going to try to share my screen. There's an article in Vegconomist about Tyson that also has blended products, and they have removed the egg from their nuggets. So now they're previously, it's called raisin rooted. They were a blended product, and now it's completely vegan. And then they did have a blended burger, and they've decided to discontinue that. It was pea protein and Angus beef, and they've decided to discontinue that. And I wondered if you had any comment, if you thought this was a trend to come or just their particular circumstance. Yeah.
Well, first, my hat's off to them for removing the eggs. I think that was a good idea. I thought it was perplexing to me that they would include eggs in a product like a meat-free chicken nugget, because it just excludes customers who want the product. So I think they did the right thing on that. On their blended burger, that was a combination of pea protein isolate and Angus beef that they discontinued. I presume they discontinued it because it wasn't selling well. I don't know that. They didn't say that. They did say in their commentary on it that they're still committed to the blending space. However, I will say, what they did is different from we at the Better Meat Co. do. What they did was basically take pea protein isolate and blend it with beef. If you want an individual ingredient, you can go to anywhere. You can go to any commodity broker for that. What we do is we make formulas that really are seamless. Because if you just put pea protein isolate in beef, it's going to taste different. It may be a fine product, but it's a different product. It tastes different, and it's just not going to operate like a regular burger does. The benefit of Better Meat Co. products is that it truly is seamless, so you really can't tell the difference. In fact, Chris Purdue from Purdue Farms recently said in an interview that Purdue Chicken Plus generally literally outperforms their solely chicken nuggets on taste with customers. In fact, focus groups have shown, compare regular chicken nuggets to the Chicken Plus nuggets, about 60% of consumers say they can't tell any difference at all. 30% say they actually prefer the blended, and 10% say they prefer the solely chicken. So in that case, it's 90% say either no difference at all or actively better. And so with the Tyson blended burger, I can't imagine they were getting that same result, because they were just using an individual pea protein isolate, which is just, it's just not going to do the same thing. So I admire that they're trying. And I think that, I hope that their next line of products, well, hopefully they'll be using better meat co. But even if they don't, I hope that they'll come up with something that is more of a seamless blend.
Okay, so let's talk about that for a second. I'd love to hear more, if you can share, about Purdue. You said previously that the companies that you're working with, they all anticipate that there will be more animals in the food supply system in the future. And I'm gobsmacked by that, because as the businesses are there to make money, and that's usually their intent, they're usually not there to, for all practical purposes, purposefully hurt animals. They're usually just there to make money and meet demand. I'm surprised that they're saying, because the inefficiency of the meat system, because it wastes water, takes time, takes land, you cut down trees, but then you make grain and then you feed those grains to animals. You could just feed those grains to people and put those grains in your products for plant-based items. I mean, it's so inefficient. I'm surprised that they're not focusing on capturing back some of those resources like land, water, and time, and making their bottom line better.
Yeah, well, I think the key is basically, what does it cost, right? And my wife and I purchased Beyond Burgers from Safeway the other day. 2 patties for $6.99. So it's $14 a pound. Now, I love Beyond. They're one of the most admirable companies, and I celebrate their success. However, you're not talking there about a 30 or a 40% increase over the cost of the beef burgers next to them. You're talking like 300 or 400% over the cost of that. And that's on beef, and chicken is even way cheaper than beef. And so you're talking here about plant-based meats being sold at numerous multiples over the cost of commodity meat so far. So you're right, Elizabeth. I totally agree with you. There's all types of inefficiencies, but many of the externalities of the meat industry are not paid by the companies that are producing meat, and they're not going to even be paid by the consumer. They're being paid by either by animals or by society in general, or with more pollution or whatever. But it's not necessarily the case that it's factored into the price. And so until those costs get internalized, we have to deal with the reality that plant-based meat today is still sold at numerous multiples over the cost of regular meat. It is every once in a while that I see something that's cost competitive, but it's very rare. And I listened to an interview with the executive chairman of Beyond Meat, who said that their goal is by the year 2025 to be cost competitive with commodity beef. That's a great goal. That's really awesome. And then, who knows about chicken? You'd have to still go a long way to get there. But I'm really grateful that we have lots of companies that are trying to reduce the cost also. Startups like Rebellious Foods with Christy Legally and Christy Middleton, who are working to try to compete on cost, not just on taste. Because as you correctly have pointed out so many times, Elizabeth, the factors that drive food purchasing are not the same factors that people like you and I hope people will make. So often if you ask animal advocates, like, hey, why should I eat plant-based? They'll say, oh, it's better for animals, better for the environment, better for your health. But most food choices are not motivated by animal welfare or the environment by health. As you've pointed out correctly, they're motivated by price, taste, and convenience. And so, now plant-based meat companies in some respects are really competing on taste. I mean, these products taste better than ever before. They're competing on convenience by being in fast food restaurants and in the meat aisle of supermarkets. But on price, not really so much. But just as I am enthusiastic about plant-based protein now being in the meat aisle, I think we should also be enthusiastic about plant-based meat being plant-based protein being in the meat itself. So yes, put plant protein in the meat aisle, but also put it in the meat. And we can, essentially have a more sustainable food system in the near term, not just hoping that in the future these prices will come down, which I have no doubt that they will, but also having plant-based protein in the meat aisle and in the meat itself, that we can actually start creating a better food system.
Let's talk for a minute about the consumer. So you are working closely here with Purdue, and I'm wondering what sort of person is buying that blended product, Purdue Plus. Are they reading the label? Are they just looking at it's the same price? Are they thinking something as exacting as, oh gosh, I'm going to get my kids to eat vegetables? What kind of consumer are we talking about?
Yeah, I really do believe that it is the latter category that Purdue is targeting the most. It's basically that mom who wants their kids to eat more plants, but they have a hard time, and so they feed them this, which is going to be 50% plant-based at least. So I think that's part of it. You know, it gets advertised as a quarter cup of vegetables per serving of nugget, essentially. So I do think that's part of it, but there's other benefits too, right? So, you know, less saturated fat, less cholesterol, fewer calories, more fiber. These are all benefits of blending that go beyond the animal welfare or sustainability benefits, but also creating meat that's actually better for people so that you have fewer people, you know, croaking from heart disease and other ailments that are associated with a high meat diet. You know, even with coronavirus right now raging and killing so many people in America, heart disease is still the #1 killer. It's still. We don't talk about the number of people who die from heart disease every day because it's just we're so inured to the fact that people are dying from this totally preventable illness. But you know, it's still the #1 killer, even with the pandemic.
Yeah, diabetes, all these lifestyle diseases that are created by what we eat. You could easily reverse them. Your body's such an amazing thing. In 3 or 4 weeks, you pull out all the meat and you know, and processed foods, et cetera. But you can really remove these, reverse these lifestyle diseases, like, as you say, cardiac disease. So let's talk about the pandemic a little bit. Again, I don't speak to many meat companies. So this is why I'm so excited to have you on here as you give us what it's like to be in their camp. Are they making that connection like the rest of the world is? I mean, COVID has been an accelerant for plant-based eating because so many people are concerned about their health and they're looking at where does my food come from? Are you seeing companies like Purdue sort of make that connection that maybe our food would be safer and therefore better for our bottom line if we started shifting away from antibiotics, hormones, and live animals? That I'll just say for a visual for everybody, the world is focused on social distancing. So we all are 6 feet away from each other. But there are 7 billion people on the planet. 77 billion land animals are slaughtered every year. And we force them to not social distance. They live on top of each other, snout to snout. We're 7 billion. They're 77 billion. That means that 90% of the world that is living and breathing is not social distancing. You will never outrun a pandemic. Are these meat companies ever thinking about this sort of stuff?
Great question, Elizabeth. So first, you know, I wrote a piece for Scientific American at the beginning of the pandemic in which I made the same argument that you're making and that numerous other people who are like-minded with you and I have made, which is that factory farms are an amplifying risk for pandemics. You put tens of thousands of animals beak to beak or snout to snout inside of these overcrowded, stressful environments where they're often living in their own feces, and you are playing Russian roulette. A genetic Russian roulette where you allow viruses to amplify and to really run the risk of having a really serious pandemic. Now, of course, the one that we're in right now is very serious, but keep in mind the mortality rate is still less than 1%. You know, you run the risk of having a bird flu or a swine flu pandemic where you start seeing where you could have, you know, mortality rates go way above that. I mean, you know, we were talking about having a bird flu strain before that was 60% fatality. And that's the type of civilizationally crippling pandemic that you could endure if we have that type of an outbreak. So I think that you're right. Now, to answer your question directly, Elizabeth, no, I think that many people in this industry still are essentially blaming Chinese wet markets, which of course are the originator of this pandemic and a very irresponsible and unsafe practice. But they still are, you know, thinking, hey, you know, we need to crack down on live markets and wet markets, not so much thinking about factory farming of animals. I'm going to do the same thing that I did before for my camera to make sure that I come back on. I'm so sorry about that. My face that I'm frozen in this is nowhere near as good as my last one. So let me just turn off my camera and I'll be right back.
I will elongate my question. Okay. So while he's getting it out and coming back in, it's surprising to me. I may have to ask this question again because you probably can't hear me. It's surprising to me that meat companies aren't thinking about all of their potential cost savings. I'm bringing you back in, Paul. I'd like to ask, move for us. So I know. Okay, there you are. So it's surprising to me because I would have thought meat companies, and I realize really you're closest with Purdue, but extrapolating from that, would be thinking about, and some cost savings with the environment, some cost savings with hormones and antibiotics, some cost savings by not having to shut down during pandemics. I would have thought that while animal welfare wouldn't be top on their list, I would have thought they would have been seeing an opportunity to tweak their business model, but you're really saying that's not driving them at all. So what is driving them to shift? Because you are, I can't say it's a major shift, but you are seeing places like JBS put up an innovation center, JBS being one of the largest meat producers in the world. They're coming out with their line of Planterra. Smithfield has come out with Pure Farmland. You know, these are drop in the buckets for them, but still, what's the motivating factor then if they're not wrapping their mind around saving money for the environment, themselves, et cetera?
Right. Well, yeah. So first of all, you know, it's not like I've done some formal survey of all the meat companies, but in the ones I do talk to, and I do talk to a lot of them, I haven't seen that. But I do think that many of them see a major future for plant protein. They think that plant-based meat is going to be a big part of the protein portfolio in the future, that in the past, where people have really thought of protein as almost synonymous with a hunk of flesh from a once living animal's body, in the future, people are going to have a far more diverse portfolio of proteins to choose from. It will, yes, they think it will also still include animal meat, but they also think it's going to involve clean meat. They think it's going to involve plant-based. They think it's going to involve hybrids, microbial proteins, and more. And they don't want to be the losers in that. I mean, they recognize that if you look at, for example, what happened in the film industry, where for decades, Kodak and Canon were vying for supremacy in the film industry, you know, Kodak sat on digital. They didn't actually embrace it because they were afraid it was going to cannibalize their own business. And instead, Canon embraced it. And we all know what happened. Kodak went bankrupt and Canon is now the largest manufacturer of digital cameras on the planet. Similarly, if you look at Netflix, we all know that Netflix displaced Blockbuster, but fewer of us ever think about the fact that Netflix started as a DVD mail-in business and streaming totally cannibalized their entire business model, but they embraced it. And so you have forward-thinking meat companies which do recognize that they need to diversify their holdings in order to safeguard themselves, because nobody knows who the winner is going to be in the future. Digital completely overtook print film, but maybe there will be some type of a portfolio like with energy where it's going to be some combination of wind and solar and geothermal, maybe nuclear. Like nobody really knows who's going to end up winning that race. And so many forward-thinking, innovative meat companies do want to embrace and really hedge the bet and see what works. And so my hat is off to the companies that you just mentioned, Elysabeth, because I think that, you know, whether it's Maple Leaf or others like you had just mentioned, like Smithfield or JBS, like they are actually embracing animal-free protein models, and in some cases blended or hybridized models to see if they work. And that's good. I think that we should encourage that and welcome them to be a part of this movement, because I'll tell you, excluding them will be much more difficult. You know, like we still have Canon selling us our memories. It's just now in digital format, right? Like we still have Netflix giving us our entertainment. It's just streaming rather than DVD. You don't have to displace the company. You just need to help these companies see that there's a better future in embracing these animal-free methods.
Yes, I couldn't agree further. And I'll just add to what you're saying. So Maple Leaf bought Light Life and Field Roast. They created a company called Greenleaf Foods that's headquartered right outside of Chicago. They just built the largest plant-based manufacturing plant in all of North America. I think it's something like 420,000 square feet. It was $320 million. Might have those reversed. It might be 320,000 square feet and $420 million. But you get where I'm going with that. More importantly, they did it right in the heart of animal agriculture, Indiana. And the contract they have with that county of Indiana is that they must hire people from Indiana right in the heart of animal agriculture. So you're talking about 420 jobs. That number I do know, 420 jobs that are now getting a plant-based paycheck. You assume a household of 4. You're talking, you know, 1,700 people are now relying on a plant-based paycheck, and nothing turns people around like a paycheck. So, you know, I love to see that kind of shift, but it sounds like what you're talking about, and I realize you can't speak for the entire meat industry, that it's a little bit like what companies are doing with politics right now. They're giving money to both Democrats and Republicans and just seeing who wins, which is little bit disconcerting, but maybe plant-based meat companies will kind of come around and see some of the benefit.